Day 616 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia, of course as expected, recently hit the absolutely staggering 300,000 Russian military personnel mark for their losses to date in this war. And this could certainly be considered quite a conservative figure when you take into account that after the initial 200,000 active military personnel that Russia used for their invasion, they then mobilized an additional 360,000 about 6 months later after that. Then add to that Russia's twice yearly conscription drives, which included about 130,000 additions every 6 months. And that's happened 4 times so far since this war began. And these are all Russian numbers, by the way, which equates to almost 1.1 million personnel used for this war. And that doesn't even include the shadow mobilization tactics that Russia employed, which included at least 50,000 mobilized convicts, and an additional unaccounted for 150,000 or so not mobilized, but rather volunteering contracted forces instead, which approximately makes for about, or at least 1.3 million Russians already committed to the war in some way. And remember that figure, because if we use some very traditional military logic that suggests an army receives 1 loss for every 3 wounded, then using this 300,000 KIA figure on the screen right here, 301 now, the math then equates to, guess what, 1.2 million. So pretty close. Now there is more nuance to these figures, and I've mentioned all about that in the past, but even still, these calculations and numbers don't not add up. That is to say, they appear to match up as a relatively consistent reflection of stated inputs versus calculated outputs. Food for thought. Then as for hardware losses, as you can see, 12 tanks, 30 APVs, and a relatively whopping 23 artillery, plus 1 air defense system. Then we'll head across to the map now as, let's see, starting off, there's been multiple reports now that Russian forces have withdrawn from Belarus, almost in their entirety, except for a few odd elements of the Russian army that manages weapon systems deployed within the country. And so, given Russia's notable losses in Ukraine's south and east recently, I'm not overly surprised that Russia would have, at some point anyway, tapped on this underutilized manpower resource in the north. So it's reasonable to suggest that Russia needed those troops to reinforce their infinitely more active front lines in Ukraine. Now, Russia would have hoped to achieve 1 or 2 things by originally stationing some of its forces in Belarus. The first being Russia potentially wanting to invade from the north, which over time just became more and more untenable for Russia, as Ukraine has spent the last 18 months setting up northern defenses. So just imagine 500 kilometers of several layers of trenches and anti-tank mines, if you will. And this second reason for Russia's forces being stationed in Belarus was to tie up large swaths of Ukrainian military in the north, therefore disenabling them from moving to more active front lines positions against Russia. But these types of Russian strategies only show benefits if they have a much more active military personnel than their Ukrainian adversary. So for Russia to no longer find it feasible to station their troops in Belarus and leave for Ukraine is a clear indication of their manpower shortages. Then moving across on the map, this time to somewhere in Russia. So here we go, Perm. So an explosion occurred in the Perm Oblast, specifically at an ammunition production factory. Russia state media reported on the incident, stating that everything is fine, nobody was hurt, and the factory workers resumed work within an hour or so later. But it is the classic spun line by Russia these days that I find harder and harder to believe. But the regularity in which these types of events continue to occur in Russia, be they oil depots, oil refineries, or ammunition warehouses or factories like this one, means that it can certainly no longer be simply as a result of accident-prone Sergei the Smoker at this stage. Not anymore. Then we'll head back into the Ukrainian map today, all the way down, as Ukrainian forces have advanced northwest of Kurdimivka. Now this is just about 10 kilometers south of Bakhmut, and we'll zoom in right there for it. Though not yet updated on this map, though you can see that it is all in the Ukrainian design to push Russian forces back east of the railway, which you can somewhat see there on the map now. Then headed south, so fighting continues unabated in Avdiivka for now, and yet again, there was no shortage of Russian hardware losses, including Russia's latest and greatest T-90M variant main battle tank, another one, again, just being destroyed. Also, just north of Avdiivka, another fully loaded Russian TOS-1A thermobaric multiple rocket launcher system also performed a massive cook-off after taking a Ukrainian FPV loitering munition hit. The Ukrainian FPV drone, truly the Achilles heel of the TOS-1A platform more than ever now. And you may remember just the other day how I mentioned that these platforms, the TOS-1As, have a range of just 6,000 meters, or about 3.7, 3.8 miles, which is indeed why it makes it particularly vulnerable to these types of FPV drone attacks. And so as for Avdiivka, no visual changes confirmed on the map today, although we've got plenty of word now that the AFU did send lots of reinforcements to the area on the brigade level. Then we'll head across to Russian-occupied Donetsk, as a refueling depot was thoroughly on fire, which looks a little reminiscent of Mount Doom in Mordor. And you can also see the railway tankers with those photos. And events like these are fairly common these days, aren't they? As Ukrainian intelligence, with its eyes in the sky, be it drones or satellite intel, are usually pretty insistent on waiting for just the right moment to perform, say, a HIMARS strike in the most effective, timely way possible. Needless to say, events like these certainly put a hamper on Russia's resupply needs for their Avdiivka operations. Oh, and it was also reported that there was various ammunition cargo destroyed in this event as well. Then we'll head down to the Southern Axis front today, just briefly, as following the events of the Ukrainian ATACMS strike on the Russian-occupied Berdyansk airbase that destroyed a great deal of Russian helicopters from about 2 weeks ago. Now, satellite images have since spotted Russia moving a number of its helicopters to its Taganrog airbase, and I need to zoom out for this one. So there it is, which is something that we were expecting Russia would do, to pull back its aircraft to some safer pastures. Although technically still in ATACMS range. But the US prohibited their use on Russian territory. But even so, this is still a problem for Russia, as it uses these aircraft for frontline air support operations for its troops. But the ability for these aircraft to now attack and engage on short notice is now heavily restricted due to that extra distance there that's needed to travel. And that's even if these helicopters that we see here are operationally ready. After all, many of these helicopters could be leftover damaged choppers that were not specifically destroyed, but instead were pelted with ATACMS, making them look like Swiss cheese. Then we'll head down to Russian-occupied Crimea, as Russian media outlet Baza posted some footage of the Crimean Bridge, showing smoke pluming from at least 3 separate points on the bridge. Although don't celebrate just yet, as this could be more like Russia's paranoia on display, as they perform some smokescreen testing operations, possibly performed due to an air alert. All traffic flows have been reported as stopped on the bridge, so successful Ukrainian strike or not, the bridge has been temporarily rendered useless. Then we'll head across to some news for today, as in what feels like an interesting change or update of sentiment for Russia. So, Russian Defense Minister and Putin fall guy, Shoigu, stated that Russia is looking to conduct political discussions with Ukraine and for the further coexistence with the West. Now, I'm not aware of any Ukrainian response to this just yet, but I always visualize in my head Zelensky's steadfast determination to simply say, here's a peace plan, get the hell out of my country. Then, Shoigu also stated that Western countries need to stop seeking Russia's strategic defeat. And so you might remember, it was just 2 days ago or so that Belarusian president and Putin's lapdog, Lukashenko, or Uncle Luka, was also expressing a somewhat similar sentiment about peace talks too. But here's the thing, Russia wants to keep its 4 annexed oblasts. Oblasts, by the way, that they never fully controlled when they decided to illegally annex them, which all very so obviously reeks of Russian illegal, greedy, and aggressive expansionism. Then in some more news, the FSO, or the Federal Protective Services of Russia, will be conducting some exercises soon in Moscow in case of a coup. And what a boomerang of a situation this one is, because objectively, we've gone from seeing a 3-day special military operation to a special coup exercise operation. Oh, how the turntables. Then jump into a couple of quick funnies to round it all off for today, guys. So the first one, not too funny, but, well, starting off. Putin has since been spotted alive on several occasions since all of those unconfirmed reports of cardiac arrest and subsequent resuscitation needed on him. Well, he is about, but he has been looking a bit squirmy or twitchy in some footage, which reminds me of Hitler with the side effects of his drug habit on full display back at the 1936 Olympics, the Olympic Games in Berlin. That's some incredible footage right there. Then, to a final funny to round it all off today, guys. Remember the events of the lynch mob overrunning the Dagestan airport in Russia just a couple of days ago? Well, Russia has an explanation for this. The Kyiv regime played a key role in these events. So, imagine losing control over your national republics so badly that you blame Ukraine for your problems. Take some effing responsibility, Russia. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please leave a like and a comment if you can. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.